Imagine a building that tracks your every single move.
Right, a total surveillance environment.
Exactly. Like, to get inside the front door, you have to swipe an electronic card. And then to walk down a hallway, there's a camera watching you from above.
Which is pretty standard for high-security facilities.
Yeah, but think about this. If you enter, say, room G13, there is a permanent digital record that you are standing in that exact spot.
A digital footprint.
Right. So how does a 24-year-old woman walk into one of the most heavily secure, technologically monitored laboratories at Yale University and just simply vanish into thin air?
Yeah, that is the chilling question at the center of today's deep dive.
Because it just doesn't make any sense.
It really doesn't.
Right.
We're opening up the true crime case files and the investigative summaries surrounding the 2009 disappearance and, well, ultimately, the murder of Annie Lay.
It's such a tragic case.
It is. And our mission today is to pull apart the mechanics of this completely baffling mystery. We really want to break down the timeline and look at how a modern, seemingly impenetrable security system was somehow bypassed.
And we're going to examine the physical and digital forensics that, finally broke the case wide open.
Because what happened to Annie Lay isn't just a horrific tragedy, it's also this fascinating, deeply unsettling look at what happens when the digital footprint we leave behind entirely contradicts the physical reality of a crime scene.
Totally. And to understand how bizarre this disappearance was, you really have to look at who Annie was, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if you examine her life on Tuesday, September 8th, 2009, she is the absolute last person you would expect to just walk away from it all.
She had everything going for her.
She really did. She's 24. She's this brilliant pharmacology graduate student. And, she is quite literally days away from her wedding.
Exactly. Her entire future is mapped out, both professionally and personally. By all accounts, she is highly reliable, meticulous, and always communicative.
Which is why, when she misses a scheduled 7:00 p.m. phone call with her fiancé, Jonathan, they had spoken earlier that morning, the alarm bells don't just ring.
No, they are deafening for the people who know her.
Right. So her roommate, Natalie Powers, officially reports Annie missing to the Yale police that very night.
And this is where the initial investigative response gets, well, pretty controversial.
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating. The Yale police essentially brushed it off at first.
Yeah, they did.
They hear the phrase 24-year-old bride-to-be missing days before the wedding, and they immediately chalk it up to pre-wedding jitters.
Like she just needed some space.
Exactly. They assume she just got cold feet and wanted to be alone.
I completely understand the frustration there, but, from a purely statistical standpoint, law enforcement operates on probabilities.
I know.
When an adult goes missing right before a massive life event like a wedding, the vast majority of the time, it is a voluntary disappearance.
Yeah.
They have to start with the most common, least threatening explanation before they escalate resources. It's just standard procedure.
I hear you, but that standard procedure completely fell apart the very next morning.
Oh, completely.
Because when police actually went to Annie's office on campus, they found her purse, her wallet, her cell phone, and her keys sitting on her desk, totally untouched.
Yeah, that changes everything.
You do not get cold feet and run off to start a new life without $1 to your name or your cell phone. At that exact moment, the statistical probability of a runaway bride drops to 0.
It drops to absolute 0. And that's the turning point where investigators are forced to retrace her steps.
Right.
This is where the physical environment, the Yale Research Lab, becomes the most crucial factor in the story. Because, this isn't an open public park where someone can wander off in any direction.
No, this is a highly restricted research facility. It's basically a fortress.
Exactly. Every restricted building on that campus requires an RFID swipe card for entry.
You don't just open a door. You ping a server that logs your unique ID and a timestamp.
Right. And when investigators check those server logs, they see Annie used her key card around 10 a.m. on that Tuesday to enter the Animal Research Lab.
And then, 11 minutes later?
Yeah, at 10:11 a.m., she swiped into room G13, which was her specific workspace.
And the security footage backs up the data perfectly, right? They see her on camera wearing a bright green top and a brown skirt, just walking into the building.
They do. But that digital timestamp completely flips the psychology of the investigation.
How so?
Well, when they fast forward the tapes to see when she left for the day, she doesn't appear.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she never leaves. So you go from searching the sprawling city of New Haven to realizing you're dealing with a sealed box.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because it's like a modern-day Agatha Christie setup. How does a person literally evaporate from a digital grid that tracks every single movement?
It's the ultimate locked room mystery. If the cameras are functioning, and they were, and the digital logs are accurate, then the math is brutal.
Meaning whoever or whatever happened to Annie Lay happened inside that specific building.
Exactly. Whatever occurred was a localized event. But then, the building itself threw a massive curveball into the mix that afternoon.
Oh, the fire alarm.
Yeah, around 1:30 p.m., a fire alarm was triggered by some lab equipment. And this sent everyone in the facility pouring out into the street in this disorganized, chaotic evacuation.
So naturally, the police think they have their answer right. They figure in the chaos of the fire drill, she must have slipped out.
That was the immediate theory. Maybe she threw on a different lab coat, or maybe she was obscured by a crowd of people, and the camera just missed her green shirt.
Which makes sense. So what did they do?
Well, investigators isolate the evacuation footage, and they study it frame by frame. I mean, they are analyzing the face and the gait of every single person exiting the building.
Looking for any sign of Annie disguised or hiding in the crowd.
Exactly. But they find absolutely nothing. She is not in that crowd.
Which just cements the terrifying reality she is still inside the lab. So, logically, you have a missing woman, a closed system, and the immediate next step should be locking down the entire facility, kicking everyone out, and treating the building as an active crime scene.
You would think so. But that didn't happen right away.
Which is where it gets really interesting, but also deeply frustrating. Because you have a missing woman, but the integrity of the lab experiments took precedence for days. Right?
It did. And this highlights a terrible, often hidden friction that occurs when law enforcement clashes with highly specialized private institutions.
Right.
Yale heavily resisted sealing the lab for forensic testing. The Connecticut Commissioner of Public Safety later noted that the university feared destroying experiments of, quote, enormous scientific value.
I have to push back on that because that sounds incredibly callous. All the digital evidence points to her being trapped inside, and the university is worried about their science experiment.
I know, it sounds horrific on its face. But to understand the delay, you have to understand how these specific pharmacological animal labs operate.
Okay, explain that to me.
We aren't just talking about a few mice in a cage. These are highly specific, genetically modified transgenic mice. Some of these knockout strains take 5 to 10 years to breed for specific cancer or disease research.
Wow. 10 years?
Yeah, they require exact, temperature-controlled environments, specialized feeding schedules, and sterile handling. If you lock down the lab and kick out the technicians, millions of dollars in grant funding and potentially a decade of life-saving medical research literally dies in a matter of days.
Oh, wow. Okay, that actually paints a much more complicated picture.
It does.
It's not just a greedy corporation. It's a genuine dilemma between an active missing person case and the preservation of irreplaceable scientific progress.
Exactly. Research universities are simply not accustomed to treating their sterile workspaces as active crime scenes. But that institutional hesitation undoubtedly delayed the investigation.
Because the police were forced to just search the periphery, right? While active research and daily lab work continued in the very rooms they desperately needed to tear apart.
Right. They needed to get in there with luminol, but they couldn't.
They did manage to bring in tracking bloodhounds early on, though.
They did, but even that failed completely.
And the reason why is just agonizingly ironic, because it's an active animal research lab, right?
Yes. The sheer volume of pheromones, animal dander, and biological waste in the building completely overloaded the dog's olfactory senses.
The dogs couldn't isolate Annie's scent because they were being bombarded by thousands of other animal scents.
Exactly. So 2 full days pass. 2 agonizing days where the digital evidence is screaming that she is inside, but physical, institutional, and biological barriers are preventing them from finding her.
Until finally, the first physical crack in the case appears.
Yes. A student notices something out of place in room G13, which was Annie's workspace. It's a box of disposable lab wipes, and on the side of it, there is what looks like a distinct pattern of blood spatter.
Which leads us to one of the most chilling, brazen moments of this entire investigation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the moment that bloody box is spotted, a campus police officer is stationed in the room to guard it while they wait for the FBI forensics team to arrive.
Right.
And while that officer is standing right there, a 24-year-old animal research technician named Raymond Clark walks into the room.
And he doesn't just walk in once. Clark walks in and out multiple times.
Just casually.
Yeah, he makes casual small talk with the officer who is literally guarding the bloody evidence. And at one point, with a staggering level of audacity, Clark physically reaches over and turns the box of wipes around to hide the bloodstain from the officer's view.
It's just unbelievable. It's like he's trying to erase a crime scene while the police are standing right next to him.
Yes. And later on, he comes back into the lab with a bunch of cleaning pads and heavy-duty spray, and he starts aggressively scrubbing a patch of the floor and a sink that already looked completely spotless.
What is the psychology behind someone being that brazen? Why would anyone think they could get away with that with a cop right there?
You're really looking at the invisible technician syndrome mixed with the panic of a cornered perpetrator.
Invisible technician.
Yeah. Raymond Clark worked in that lab every single day. He knew the researchers, he knew the maintenance schedules, and he was intimately familiar with the layout. He felt a deep sense of ownership over that physical space.
Right. He belongs there.
Exactly. And because cleaning the animal enclosures and the lab was a routine part of his actual job, he convinced himself that his aggressive cleaning would just look like a dedicated employee doing his duties.
Wow.
It's a dangerous overconfidence.
Well, his overconfidence totally backfires because that bizarre behavior immediately puts a massive spotlight on him. Investigators pull Clark into an interview room.
And he plays it incredibly cool.
He does. He tells them he only knew Annie professionally. He just handled the cages for her specific lab. He admits he saw her that morning, but claims he left for lunch.
And then he makes his fatal mistake.
He confidently tells police that he watched Annie walk out of the building around 12:45 p.m.
And in that single sentence, his entire defense evaporates.
Yep.
Because, as we established, the investigators have already pulled the digital server logs and reviewed every second of the camera footage.
They know for an absolute, verifiable fact that Annie never walked out.
Clark's physical alibi is instantly destroyed by the digital surveillance system.
And while he's spinning this lie, the investigators sitting across the table notice something else.
The scratches.
Yeah. Clark has fresh, deep scratches on his face and down his left arm. And when they ask him how he got them, he gives the oldest, most cliche excuse in the book.
He blames the scratches on his cat.
Unbelievable.
At this exact moment, the entire paradigm shifts. Investigators aren't just looking for a missing person anymore. They are building a homicide case against Raymond Clark.
And the physical breadcrumbs start to perfectly align with the digital trap he didn't realize he was in.
Yes. Shortly after that interview, police searching the building's recycling bins make a massive discovery. They find a balled-up, heavily blood-stained lab coat.
And it's not just any lab coat. It's the exact same style of coat that Clark was seen wearing on the security footage earlier that Tuesday.
Right. And forensic tests quickly confirmed that the massive amounts of blood on that coat belonged to Annie Lay.
So while the police wait on a judge to approve a warrant to forcibly collect Clark's DNA, they start digging into his background.
And on paper, he was clean. No criminal record, no arrests.
But investigators don't just look at convictions, they look at police interactions.
Exactly. They uncover an old, uncharged police report filed by an ex-girlfriend of Clark's. In that report, she alleged that he had become violently possessive and had even forced her to have sex.
Now, I have to pause here because this brings up a huge question about institutional responsibility.
It really does.
We know Annie's family later sued Yale for ignoring red flags like this, but how exactly is a university supposed to know about an incident if the victim never pressed charges and it never went to court?
It's a fantastic question. And it's the exact friction point of corporate background checks.
Right.
When a university or a company runs a standard background check, they are looking for convictions or active warrants. An uncharged complaint sitting in a local precinct's filing cabinet does not automatically populate on an employment screening.
So Yale wouldn't have seen it.
Probably not. However, the lawsuit argued that there were behavioral red flags on the job instances of Clark being overly aggressive or controlling about the lab space with female colleagues that supervisors failed to document or escalate.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's not just the hidden police report, it's a pattern of behavior in the workplace that went unchecked.
Precisely. And speaking of his behavior, police go back to that fire alarm footage. Remember how they scoured the crowd looking for Annie?
Yeah.
This time, they watch it looking for Clark. And they spot him. During the evacuation, while everyone else is chatting and waiting to go back inside, the cameras catch Clark standing isolated outside the building, visibly shaking, sitting on the curb with his head in his hands.
Wow. His internal panic was bleeding out into the open.
It was. And this brings us back to the sheer infallibility of the digital footprint. What's fascinating here is how the digital surveillance system, which Clark likely thought he could outsmart, became the ultimate unbiased witness.
It totally dismantled his physical alibi piece by piece.
Exactly. His own RFID keycard records painted a definitive, unavoidable map of his crimes. The log showed that on that Tuesday, Clark swiped into Annie's lab, room G13, at exactly 10:40 a.m.
And for the next several hours, his keycard shows this frantic, repetitive pattern. He is swiping back and forth over and over again between room G13 and another room down the hall, a supply storage room labeled G22.
In the really damning part, the server logs from the previous 6 months show he almost never used those specific rooms.
He had no official reason to be pacing between them.
None. The digital footprint is completely unbiased. It doesn't have a motive, it doesn't get confused, and it doesn't forget. So, armed with this data, the police finally forced the university to completely lock down the facility, disregard the experiments, and allow a full forensic team inside. And they marched straight to room G22.
And inside that storage room, low to the ground, behind a rolling supply cart, they find fresh blood smeared on the wall.
Yes.
But they also find something deeply personal. 2 small brown beads lying on the floor.
Which investigators immediately recognized.
Right, they perfectly matched the necklace Annie was wearing in the morning security footage when she first swiped into the building.
And when they moved to room G13, Annie's actual workspace, the forensic evidence is overwhelming. They find a single black hair with the root still attached, indicating it was forcibly pulled.
Awful.
They spray chemical reagents on the walls, which light up, revealing massive blood stains that someone had clearly attempted to wipe away with a heavy cleaning solution.
Which, of course, perfectly explains why Clark was aggressively scrubbing pristine walls in front of the officer earlier.
Exactly. They also find additional biological stains on the wall, and laboratory testing reveals they contain seminal fluid.
It's just a cascade of horrific discoveries. And once they know what they are looking for, investigators realize the killer used the architecture of the building to hide his crimes.
He did.
Like, above a removable ceiling tile in the staff locker room, they find a hidden stash. It's a bloody glove, a sock, a pair of heavy work boots with the name Ray C. written on them in marker, and blood-stained blue surgical scrubs.
And in a drainage pipe, they pull out plastic bags, plastic tubing, scissors, and rags shoved deep inside.
It's crazy.
Well, you have to think about the physical constraints he was under. He couldn't put the bloody evidence in his backpack and walk out the front door because he knew he'd be recorded on camera.
He was trapped by the closed system.
Yes. So he was forced to conduct a frantic, highly disorganized cover-up, shoving evidence into the ceiling plenums and the plumbing, just hoping no one would do maintenance before the trash was collected.
Yeah. But the most tragic reality of this entire case unfolds a few days later, on Sunday, September 13th, 2009.
Yeah.
And the emotional juxtaposition of this specific day is absolutely gut-wrenching, because September 13th was supposed to be Annie and Jonathan's wedding day.
It's just heartbreaking.
It really is. While her wedding dress hung completely untouched in her closet in New Haven, this horrific scene was unfolding back at the Yale lab.
Over the weekend, investigators working inside the sealed lab began to notice a very faint, localized odor of decomposition.
So they bring in a specialized cadaver dog.
Yes,
Blah.
a dog named Max.
Mm.
And Max bypasses all the animal cages and leads handlers directly to a specific staff restroom in the basement facility. Max immediately zeroes in on a toilet stall.
And behind that specific toilet, there was a small metal plumbing access panel built into the wall. The officers noticed that the screws holding the panel in place were loose and scratched.
Right.
When they removed the metal panel, the smell of decomposition was overpowering. Inside the wall, behind the fiberglass insulation and a maze of copper pipes in a dark, incredibly cramped space, barely the size of 2 or 3 shoeboxes, they found Annie Liz's body.
She had been brutally wedged upside down inside the wall.
How did he even manage to hide her for so long without the smell alerting the entire building?
It comes back to the specialized architecture of a research lab. That space in the wall is known as a pipe chase.
Okay.
In commercial laboratories, these chases are often negative pressure zones. They are designed to pull air out of the building and vent it straight to the roof to prevent chemical cross-contamination.
Oh, wow.
So the building's own ventilation system was actively sucking the odor up and away from the hallways, masking the smell for days.
That is deeply chilling. And the autopsy confirmed the horrific reality of her final moments. Her official cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation. Furthermore, the medical examiner found that her jaw and collarbone were severely broken, and the hemorrhaging indicated those injuries were inflicted while she was still alive.
It's incredibly brutal.
Her clothing was torn, and the presence of seminal fluid confirmed she had been sexually assaulted before she was murdered.
But amid the horror of that discovery, investigators found one bizarre, incredibly specific detail resting right next to her body inside the wall.
What was it?
A green pen.
Okay.
And it wasn't just a random office supply. It was the exact same make and model of pen that the police had used when they collected Raymond Clark's DNA swab in the interview room earlier in the week.
Oh my God, which is such a massive forensic slip-up on his part.
Huge.
He must have had the pen in his pocket, maybe he chewed on it at his desk, and it fell out while he was hiding her body.
Most likely.
And the science of touch DNA is incredible here. Even without visible blood on the pen, the friction of his fingers left behind microscopic epithelial skin cells on the plastic ridges of the pen cap.
Right. And when the forensic lab processed it, they extracted a full genetic profile.
And those DNA results were the final nail in the coffin. They were absolutely conclusive.
Completely. Clark's DNA perfectly matched the semen stains found on the walls in the lab. It matched the biological material on the hidden sock in the ceiling. It matched the skin cells on the green pen. And Annie's clothing contained massive amounts of his genetic material.
So the scientific evidence, the digital keycard logs, the physical clues hidden in the walls, it all formed an inescapable, interlocking web. On September 17th, Raymond Clark was arrested at a motel and held on a massive $3 million bond.
He was formally charged with murder and felony murder.
But he didn't confess right away, did he?
No. Initially, Clark pleaded not guilty, which is common as defense attorneys review the discovery. But the physical and digital evidence was simply too overwhelming to beat in front of a jury. Almost 2 years later, in March 2011, Clark changed his strategy. He pleaded guilty to the murder charge, and for the attempted sexual assault charge, he entered what is known in the legal system as an Alford plea.
Let's break that down for the listener, because an Alford plea is a very specific and often controversial legal maneuver.
It is.
It essentially means the defendant stands before the judge and says, I maintain my innocence, but I legally admit that the prosecution has enough evidence to convince a jury to convict me.
Exactly. It stems from a 1970s Supreme Court case, North Carolina v. Alford. It allows a defendant to accept a plea deal and a guaranteed sentence without ever actually confessing to the specific details of the crime.
Which has to be so tough for the families.
It can be an incredibly bitter pill to swallow because you get a conviction, but you don't get the closure of a full confession. Clark was sentenced to 44 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
And because he took that plea, he never had to explain himself. To this very day, Raymond Clark has never offered a motive for why he violently attacked Annie Lay.
No. We have the how, we have the timeline, but we will likely never have the why.
The aftermath of this case rippled far beyond the criminal conviction, sparking major changes in campus security protocols nationwide.
It did. Annie's family eventually filed that wrongful death lawsuit against Yale University, arguing the institution failed to protect a student in their own restricted facility.
And that lawsuit was ultimately settled out of court for $3 million.
Right.
You know, as we look back on all these case files, there is one haunting detail from Annie's life that just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
A few months before her death, Annie had written a short article for a local New Haven publication. The piece was titled Crime and Safety in New Haven. She was giving advice to other students on how to navigate the city.
Right.
And her closing line in that article was, but with the little street smarts, one can avoid becoming yet another statistic.
It's a devastating irony. Annie was absolutely right in her intent, but tragically wrong in her premise. She was not a statistic. She was a brilliant, loved young scientist taken by senseless violence.
Yeah.
But her story highlights a heartbreaking truth that challenges everything we think we know about safety. Street smarts are entirely designed for the outside world. They are meant for dark alleys and late-night subway rides.
Right, the obvious dangers.
Exactly.
Ah.
They cannot protect you from a threat that is already inside your own sanctuary, scanning the same keycard and wearing the uniform of a colleague.
It really forces you to reevaluate our modern relationship with security. I mean, we started this deep dive talking about a locked room mystery.
We did.
We saw how the architecture of a building, the ventilation, the plumbing was manipulated to hide a crime. We saw how a digital footprint became the ultimate infallible witness that took down a killer who thought his physical familiarity with the lab made him invincible.
And above all, we witnessed the tragic loss of a bright young mind whose future was stolen in a place she had every logical reason to believe was entirely safe.
Which leaves you with something pretty heavy to mull over today. We rely so heavily on these highly monitored, secure environments to give us peace of mind. We look at keycard-restricted glass doors, RFID badges, and omnipresent cameras, and we think to ourselves, this system is keeping the bad guys out.
Right. We trust the system.
But does this illusion of absolute security actually put us in greater danger? Because when we assume a locked room keeps us safe, we drop our guard. We forget that the locked door might just be trapping us inside with a threat we mistakenly trust, simply because they have a badge to get in. Until next time, stay curious and pay close attention to who shared your locked rooms.